If being on an SSRI isn't an INFP trait, it probably should be. Hello everybody, I'm TrebleKnight and I am an INFP. And if you spend a lot of time in the INFP community, you'll quickly learn that a lot of people just aren't doing particularly well. There's a lot of depression, a lot of sadness. And the other day, I was thinking about how the INFP cognitive function stack really sets you up to be unhappy. Now, I don't think that the cognitive functions need to make an INFP unhappy, but I think in the world that we live in and how most of us have been raised, I think it's only natural for the INFP cognitive functions to really take you down this path. When you look at the first INFP cognitive function, it's introverted feeling. And this is a cognitive function that focuses on building an internal value-based framework and trying to be genuine to that framework. This is not an easy thing to do, and it takes a lot of time. The average INFP is going to spend a lot of time in their head just trying to mediate between all of these different values and ideas. Now, ISFPs also have FI, but if you take NE, which is the INFP's auxiliary function, and you add that to FI, then all of a sudden you end up being inundated with all of these new ideas that you need to sit through and sort of mediate. I mean, they call the INFP the mediator for a reason, but this takes a lot of time, and you can really easily feel isolated. I know for me personally, it wasn't until relatively recently that I'd say I have any real friends. Now I've got a good small community around me, but it wasn't always that way. And it can be even more frustrating when you look around and you notice that nobody else really shares your values. INFP's values don't tend to just fit on an index card. They tend to be all over the place. And if you happen to be a very spiritual INFP, like most of you probably are, your ideas are probably very esoteric, making it pretty hard to find a community of people who like you, or at least agree with you. Another big problem with FI is I think that it can lead to perfectionism. Perfectionism is probably one of the biggest things I struggle with in life. I can't tell you how many times I've wanted to do something, but just kept on putting it off because of being afraid that it wouldn't become perfect. I love experimenting with ideas in my head. Ideas are infinite. They can be anything. They're not limited by scarcity or my ability to do things. I've made jokes about how INFP daydreams could break records for the most box office sales ever. My daydreams are so vibrant and filled with lore and characters and all kinds of fun ideas, but I almost never write any of them down. And the reason why I don't do it is because the minute I take an idea from my head and I put it on paper, that idea goes from having infinite possibilities to being limited by the page. So even if my execution of an idea is perfect, which, let's be honest, INFP's worst function is TE, so it's not going to be perfect. But even if it was perfect, it would still be nowhere nearly as awesome as the idea in my head. Something a bit more recent happened is I just got a tapestry off Amazon to put at my place. I had everything I needed to hang it, but I didn't want to do it because I was sort of afraid that what if I didn't set it up right? What if it didn't look as good as I wanted it to look? Also, the timing wasn't perfect because I didn't have the fairy lights because I have a tapestry and fairy lights. The fairy lights should be coming today. I might post a picture of the setup on Patreon, but anyway, that kind of leads me to sort of another problem that I think can happen with perfectionism, and that is, not only being perfect, but having perfect time. And I think this can kind of play into the role of SI, because I know that I've wanted to do projects before, and then I think to myself of a time where something happened in the past that was similar, but now it's not like that time. So maybe I should wait for things to be more similar to how they were back then. So you're always looking for that perfect timing. And of course, that perfect timing never happens. So a lot of times I just kind of have to force myself to do stuff, which isn't an easy thing to do, especially when you're an INFP. Because you don't want to feel forced to do things. You want to do things because it feels right. Problem is, it's never going to feel right. And you can kind of see that problem there. Moving on to NE, INFPs have a huge tendency to compare themselves to others. And I don't think this is a uniquely INFP trait. I think everybody compares themselves to others. But this can lead to all kinds of problems like, you know, imposter syndrome. I look at all these other MBTI channels and I feel like they know so much more about 16 personalities and the cognitive functions than I do. I didn't even set out to make an MBTI channel. I just happened to make a video at MBTI one day. It did very well, and since then I've just been making more videos because one, I enjoy talking about MBTI, and two, it gets a lot of views. So it's a win-win. But I just kind of feel like I have no understanding of the topic and probably not qualified to talk about it at all. Not to mention all of these other creators and what they're able to pull off. I'm not the greatest artist, I'm not the greatest editor, I'm not the greatest writer. So all my stuff just, you know, constantly feels inadequate, and that kind of goes back to the whole perfectionism thing. I have other ideas that I want to work on too, but that perfectionism and that comparison is constantly holding me back. I kind of never feel like I fit in anywhere, and that goes back to the whole isolation feeling. Now, a lot of times people say, hey, you should be okay to fail. You should be okay with doing badly. Things don't have to be 100%. If they can just be 70%, then that's good enough. Well, my problem is, what is 70%? And what about the distribution of that 70%? What if, like, the ending of my video is, say, 90%, but the beginning of my video is only 20%? If that averages out to above 70%, does that count as enough? It's a lot easier said than done with handling perfectionism. And I guess you could say that that's being a perfectionist about overcoming perfectionism, which is kind of funny. If you read a lot about mental health and being happy, so much of it these days is based on mindfulness. There's a meditation that I've learned to do, and it's all about focusing on all of the sensory stuff around you. You focus on what can you hear, what can you smell, what can you feel. And the idea is that this will help ground you in the moment. Being grounded, that seems to be what a lot of people are saying is the goal. But the problem is, all of that sensory stuff is rooted in SE, which is the INFP's blind spot function. With ISFPs who also have introverted feeling as a primary function, they have SE, the mindfulness function, as their auxiliary. So that gives them a huge advantage. But for INFPs, we don't get that. We really have to work on seeing the sensory and working hard on being mindful. Back to the idea of, you know, always being in my head. I've oftentimes felt kind of disappointed because of the fact I've spent so much of my own life thinking about things, debating in my head. I've always felt that my practical skills are somewhat lacking. Other people have been drawing since they were 12, and they are incredible artists. Some people have been playing their piano since they were 12 and can make a living off of that professionally. These are both things that I've been working on learning, but I am particularly unskilled in them because I've spent so much of my life in my head avoiding the sensory world, which is not a way to be happy, but at the same time, I do enjoy being in my head. So I think a lot of the secret for INFPs being mindful is to try to find that balance. And that really comes down to almost all of it, right? Trying to balance your first two functions of FI and NE with your final functions SI and TE. I guess it's just a really good thing that INFPs are so good at balancing different ideas because I think that we have the keys to figure out how to do it. It's just a matter of trying to figure it out. Anyway, that's it for this video, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this slower paced, more talky video, I also made a video about can you have two personality types, and you can watch that right here. Thank you so much for watching. Special thanks to my patrons, and I'll catch you guys all next time.